Pegasus alights daintily in the Android ecosystem. British authorities warn of possible Iris cyberattacks on infrastructure. Russia investigates the St. Petersburg metro bombing. New evidence connects North Korea with the Lazarus group. Fancy Bear continues to romp unabated, and Turla seems to have remained quietly active for about 20 years. Apple issues an emergency iOS patch, plus some industry notes and tax season security advice. Time to thank our sponsor, Palo Alto Networks. You can visit them at go.paloaltonetworks.com/secureclouds. Software as a service applications are changing the way organizations do business, as data now lives beyond the traditional network perimeter. What are you doing to keep your organization's data secure in this new environment? Palo Alto Networks helps organizations with complete SaaS protection, providing detailed software-as-a-service visibility and granular control, data governance, automated risk remediation, and malware prevention. Palo Alto Networks offers the most comprehensive cybersecurity for all cloud and software-as-a-service environments, because secure clouds are happy clouds. Get started securing yours at go.paloaltonetworks.com/secureclouds. And we thank Palo Alto Networks for sponsoring our show. Major funding for the CyberWire podcast is provided by Cylance. I'm Dave Bittner in Baltimore with your CyberWire summary for Tuesday, April 4th, 2017. There's some nasty attack code out there affecting Android devices. A version of the Pegasus malware that Lookout found infesting iOS last autumn. Now, Lookout's security intelligence team, working with Google, has found the long-expected Android variant, which you can call either Pegasus for Android or Chrysaor. It's a sophisticated bit of malware. Lookout says it has the same sort of spying functionality as its iOS counterpart, including screenshot and audio capture, email and browser compromise, and data exfiltration. If it senses that it's been detected, it will delete itself. The good news is that Pegasus attacks seem to be very narrowly targeted. If you, however, find your device infected, Lookout Security asks you to contact them. The British government is again warning infrastructure operators, especially those concerned with nuclear power plants and airports, to be on alert for ICS cyber attacks mounted by ISIS. We heard from Edgard Capdeville, CEO of Nozomi Networks, who notes that these warnings began in February, and he thinks they're unlikely to have been ignored. Nonetheless, it wouldn't do to become complacent. Much infrastructure continues to be controlled by older systems which have, given their long life cycles, only relatively recently been connected. He sees one silver lining. Control system traffic tends to be predictable, which provides a background against which anomalies stand out. Should these concerns prove a real threat, they would indicate a considerable increase in ISIS cyber capabilities, which have hitherto been largely confined to information operations. Russian authorities are investigating suspected jihadist links to yesterday's suicide bombing in the St. Petersburg metro. A Russian citizen is thought to have been the bomber. Kaspersky offers more evidence connecting the Bangladesh bank fraudulent funds transfers to the North Korean government. The Lazarus group is now generally suspected of being a DPRK asset. As U.S. pressure on the DPRK over recent missile launches increases, including efforts to work with China on a bilateral response, and as the Chinese coal embargo bites Pyongyang harder, observers expect a corresponding rise in cyber activity both from and against North Korea. More warnings, this time from SecureWorks, of continued espionage from Fancy Bear, which they're calling Iron Twilight, but it's the same familiar GRU crew. A recent victim, the IAAF, apologizes for the loss of athletes' medical records to the Russian espionage services. SecureWorks predicts that 2017 will see no let-up in Fancy Bear's operations, which have grown increasingly brazen since the spring of 2016. Another Russian espionage group has been connected to 1998's Midnight Maze operation against the U.S. Department of Defense. Exactly where this one would appear in a state-cum-criminal organization chart is unclear, but it's the familiar Turla APT. Turla is also known as Snake, Ouroboros, Venomous Bear, or Krypton. The group is still using, and apparently with success, versions of the venerable Locky backdoor. Continuing our coverage of last week's Women in Cybersecurity Conference, I sat down with Amanda Rousseau, malware researcher at Endgame, to learn about her work and the path she took to get there.
I'm always looking at security news because I'm following the current threats and trends as they come along. And then what I'll do is I'll look at those independently and try to reverse engineer it or recreate it so that I can create a new detection for it. And it can be either ransomware one day, or it can be APT malware another, or even like kernel level stuff. It all depends on what's the hot new thing at the time. Kind of like following fashion trends.
What is the pathway that took you to malware engineering? Like, what was how did that become the thing you were interested in?
Well, okay, so I'll start back when I got into computer science and everything. So I really didn't think I would be doing this field at all. I started out in graphic design, which is why all of my slides and presentations are all pretty. And then once I took a computer science class, I couldn't look back. And then I heard about what reverse engineers do because my dad was in the Air Force, and he kind of knew about that hacking world, and he would kind of, drill me in conversations on security and protection and all that. And then that's how I learned what reverse engineer did. So I worked my way up through the DoD at the Cybercrime Center and incident response to get to malware reverse engineering research and development.
When you're looking ahead, sort of looking over the horizon at what the challenges are facing people in your field, what are those things?
I think it's just plain knowledge of it. A lot of people don't know about the hacking world, and when they see it on the news, they think it's some type of magic or, it's evil. But a lot of people out there, they want to protect other people, and that's how I feel about it. Like, I want to protect the normal person. I want to protect a nuclear power plant. I want to protect the critical infrastructures. But to do that, I need to look at threats and trends and build something that's actually useful.
Coming at this field as a woman, has there been any specific challenges from that point of view, for you to be able to get where you are today?
Oh yes, a lot of imposter syndrome all the time. When I started, you're in computer science class and you're like one of the only girls in the class, or one of 5 in the whole department. And you feel, am I on par with everyone else? Like, what am I doing wrong? But I was actually average. I wasn't bad. I wasn't too good. I would understand it and get it. And it was the same in my career. I was young. I was a girl. I didn't know how to act in a corporate environment. Trying to deal with social situations. That you grew that over time, and eventually, you start to gain confidence in what you do, and then that's when you can focus on just your work and not what's going on socially.
That's Amanda Rousseau from Endgame. You can hear more from her in our upcoming CyberWire Women in Cybersecurity Conference Special Edition. She's on Twitter at malwareunicorn, and it's a feed worth following. Israeli security researcher Amahi Neiderman reports finding 40 zero-day vulnerabilities in Samsung's Tizen OS. Tizen runs on smart TVs, smartwatches, and on some Samsung phones. If exploited, they would give an attacker control over the device. Apple issues an emergency iOS patch to close a Wi-Fi drive-by vulnerability. This is in addition to last week's regular patches. In industry news, Verizon will combine its AOL and Yahoo acquisitions into a unit called Oath, and Intel Security has now spun out and become McAfee once more. And finally, we're just 2 weeks away from tax filing day in the U.S. Fraudulent returns have, according to experts, resulted in tens of millions of dollars lost. We'd like to pass on some advice from the encryption company AlertSec. They recommend that businesses protect themselves by using a VPN tunnel with encrypted communications, full disk encryption, multi-factor authentication, and a good firewall. It's familiar advice, but good advice. It's also good to remember that your personal information, always a target for criminals, will receive particular attention this month. So be prudent, stay safe, and happy filing. Taxes are the price we pay for civilization, or so we hear. Time to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor, Control Risks. If you own cybersecurity in your organization, let's be honest, you might not sleep easily. If you lie awake thinking about new threats over the horizon or how to allocate your limited resources, Control Risks can help. It's often impossible to separate threats to your data from geopolitical swings, local regulatory shifts, and competitors' maneuvering. Without a risk-led approach, how can you be sure all your shiny tools are working? Talk to Control Risks. They treat information security as a business risk, not just a technical problem. For over 40 years, they've helped clients proactively identify and mitigate risk, respond to and recover from disruption, and capitalize on opportunities. In short, they bring order to chaos and reassurance to anxiety. Let Control Risk help you spend money where it really counts, protecting what really matters. Find out more at controlrisks.com/cyberwire. That's controlrisks.com/cyberwire. And we thank Control Risks for sponsoring our show. Joining me once again is Dr. Charles Clancy. He's the director of the Hume Center for National Security and Technology at Virginia Tech. Dr. Clancy, we are certainly familiar with denial of service attacks here on the CyberWire, but today you wanted to touch base about denial of service when it comes to our telephone system.
Yeah, there's an interesting new set of control plane attacks that are happening within the landline and cellular telephony infrastructure. Your listeners may be familiar with many of the control plane protocols on the internet. There are similar but different control plane protocols within our telecommunications infrastructure, with the legacy protocols being SS7 and some of the newer ones with voice over IP all being based around SIP. So in the same way that you can launch a distributed denial of service attack against an IP network, you can do the same thing against a phone number, right? It's a unique identifier, just like an IP address. So there have been a number of cases with an increasing rate of such cases where bad actors have essentially gotten a whole bunch of devices to simultaneously call 911. And what happens is essentially the trunking line from the local landline phone operator into the public safety answering point, where there are operators who answer these 911 calls, becomes overwhelmed with calls, and there aren't enough channels in the trunk in order to have additional calls terminated within the PSAP, or the public safety answering point. But I guess there is some light at the end of the tunnel. There are some standardization efforts underway right now within the Internet Engineering Task Force that are looking at adding authentication to some of the newer SIP protocols associated with the caller ID, which would give telecommunications companies the ability to start blocking calls rather than having to sort of manually trace them back to the originator.
And in terms of overwhelming a 911 system, are the people who are doing this at this stage, are they simply pranking and testing out their abilities, or is there any sort of ransom component, or what's their motivation?
Right now, there doesn't appear to be any kind of criminal component associated with it. One of the more recent examples was essentially someone who walked into a cell phone store in Texas and walked around to each one of the display phones in the store and dialed 911 on each of them. And since cell phones are required to place outbound emergency calls, regardless of whether or not they have a SIM card active within them, all of these calls went through, despite the fact that these phones didn't have valid SIM cards. So far, there have not been any examples that are associated, as far as we can tell, with a ransomware type attack or an effort to prevent other people from calling 911 as part of some sort of criminal activity. But many believe that it's only a matter of time before that sort of behavior begins to show up in the landscape.
All right, Dr. Charles Clancy, thanks for joining us. And that's the CyberWire. Thanks to all of our sponsors who make the CyberWire possible, especially to our sustaining sponsor, Cylance. To find out how Cylance can protect you from cyber attacks, head on over to cylance.com. The CyberWire podcast is produced by Pratt Street Media. Our editor is John Petrick. Our social media editor is Jennifer Iben. Our technical editor is Chris Russell. Executive editor is Peter Kilpie. And I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening.